The sun had barely risen when Ethan Miller, a man in his early 40s, found himself staring blankly at the bathroom mirror. His eyes were tired, not just from a restless night, but from the weight of a failing marriage and a career that seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Ethan was a successful executive in the pharmaceutical industry, respected by his colleagues and feared by his competitors. But lately, it felt like everything he'd built was slowly unraveling. His wife, Vanessa, had been distant for months now. Conversations had become mere exchanges of pleasantries, and the once passionate nights had turned into cold, silent stares from opposite sides of the bed. Ethan had tried everything: weekend getaways, fancy dinners, heartfelt talks, but Vanessa's responses were either curt or evasive. He couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that she was hiding something, or worse, someone. "Are you even listening to me, Ethan?" Vanessa's voice snapped him back to reality. She was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, wearing an expression that had become all too familiar. Irritation mixed with disappointment. Yeah, I'm here," he muttered, splashing cold water on his face, hoping to wash away his frustrations along with the remnants of last night's scotch. Vanessa sighed deeply. "You're not, Ethan. You haven't been for a while," she said quietly, her voice breaking slightly. Ethan looked at her, but the connection they once had seemed lost, hidden behind a wall of secrets and unspoken words. Later that day, Ethan attended a charity event hosted by his company. It was supposed to be a night of mingling with potential investors and networking, but Ethan's mind was elsewhere. He scanned the room for Vanessa, who was busy chatting animatedly with a group of people Ethan didn't recognize. He couldn't help but wonder if one of them was the reason for her sudden detachment. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a voice that seemed out of place in the lavish ballroom. "Sir, can I talk to you for a moment?" He turned to see a boy, no older than 16, with ragged clothes and messy hair. The boy's blue eyes were sharp, alert, but there was an undeniable hint of desperation in them. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What is it, kid? This isn't exactly the place for..." The boy cut him off, leaning closer and lowering his voice. "Your wife. She's been doing something to your food. Be careful." Ethan's heart raced. "What the hell are you talking about?" But the boy, Jake, simply shook his head. "Just watch out. You'll see." And with that, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ethan confused and slightly shaken. That night, Ethan returned home earlier than usual. Vanessa was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew. She seemed startled to see him. "You're home early," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and annoyance. Ethan decided to confront her head-on. "Vanessa, we need to talk. Right now." Vanessa stiffened. "What's this about, Ethan? Another one of your I miss us speeches?" "No," he replied, his voice cold and steady. "I met someone tonight, a boy. He said something strange about you and the food." Vanessa's face paled. Her hand trembled as she set the spoon down. "Who was he? What did he say?" "He didn't give me a name, just said to be careful about what you're cooking for me," Ethan said, studying her reaction closely. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan saw genuine fear in her expression. "Ethan, it's not what you think." "Then what is it, Vanessa?" "Because I'm running out of patience." Tears streamed down Vanessa's face. "I never wanted this, Ethan. I didn't know how to tell you." "Tell me what?" he demanded, his voice rising. "There's something you don't know about me," Vanessa whispered, her voice barely audible. "Something from my past. It's about my son." Ethan's confusion deepened. "Your son? You never mentioned a son." Vanessa's voice broke completely. "He was taken from me when he was just a baby. I never found him. Until now." The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Everything started to make a twisted kind of sense, but it only raised more questions. Was Jake the missing son? And why was Vanessa so afraid to reveal the truth? Ethan was more determined than ever to uncover the secrets that had been buried for so long. Ethan felt his chest tighten as Vanessa's words echoed in his mind. "He was taken from me when he was just a baby." He stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, struggling to make sense of it all. His initial anger gave way to a gnawing curiosity, a desperate need to understand the full story. Vanessa sat at the kitchen table, her hands shaking, her face etched with a mix of guilt and anguish. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Ethan's voice was a blend of accusation and disbelief. Vanessa looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "How could I, Ethan? How could I bring up something so painful when I never even had answers? I never knew what happened to him. You thought you'd forget?" Ethan cut in, his tone harsher than intended. "You thought you could bury it and move on?" "No," Vanessa said quietly. "I never tried to forget. I couldn't. But I couldn't share it with you either. Not until I was sure." "Sure about what?" Ethan demanded. "Sure that he was still out there," she answered, her voice barely audible. "That he was still alive." The word struck Ethan like a cold slap. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the kitchen floor as he tried to make sense of everything. "And this boy, Jake, is he the one?" Vanessa hesitated. "I don't know. I think so. I've been trying to find out, but I didn't want to raise your suspicions, or anyone else's." Ethan was taken aback by her admission. "How long have you known about him?" "Just a few weeks," Vanessa confessed, wiping her tears. "He started showing up near the house, at the park where I walk. I tried to talk to him, but he was so guarded. Then he started dropping hints, asking me strange questions, things only I would understand. I think he's my son, Ethan. I really do." Ethan stared at Vanessa, the weight of her words sinking in. But one question burned hotter than the rest. Why had Jake approached Ethan instead of Vanessa? The warning about the food lingered ominously in his mind. The next morning, Ethan decided to go to the same park where Vanessa claimed to have seen Jake. He walked the path slowly, scanning every corner, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had to find Jake. He needed answers. After nearly an hour of searching, Ethan spotted the boy sitting on a bench, head bowed, scribbling in a worn notebook. Ethan approached cautiously, unsure of how to start the conversation. "Jake?" Ethan called out, his voice firm but calm. The boy looked up, startled, but then his expression softened. "You came," Jake said simply. Ethan sat down beside him, maintaining a cautious distance. "I need to understand what's going on. You warned me about Vanessa, about the food. Why?" Jake hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "I needed to get your attention. I had no other choice." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that? Is there something dangerous here that I don't know about?" Jake's gaze was steady, his voice low. "Your wife, she's hiding things. And not just about me. There's more, things you don't know about her past. Things that could hurt you." Ethan's mind raced. "If you are who she thinks you are, why didn't you just tell her the truth?" Jake's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Because I'm not sure yet. I need proof, and so does she." Ethan felt a surge of frustration mixed with sympathy. "If you really are Vanessa's son, then we need to get to the bottom of this. But you need to stop playing games, Jake." Jake nodded slowly, but there was a hint of defiance in his eyes. "I don't want to hurt her, or you. I just want to know if she's really my mother." As Ethan and Jake continued to talk, the boy revealed fragments of his past. Memories of a woman's voice singing him to sleep, the scent of vanilla that reminded him of safety, and a faint recollection of a car ride that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. It was clear that Jake's memories were clouded, distorted by years of uncertainty and hardship. But Ethan noticed something else, something that made his chest tighten with a strange mix of hope and fear. Jake's mannerisms, the way he tilted his head when listening, the way his fingers absent-mindedly traced patterns on the bench, it all reminded him of Vanessa. The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. Later that evening, Ethan confronted Vanessa once more. "I spoke to Jake," he said bluntly as he entered the living room. Vanessa, who was sitting with a glass of wine in hand, looked up sharply. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice barely hiding the desperation. "He wants proof, Vanessa. He needs to know for sure, and so do we." Vanessa's eyes filled with a mix of hope and dread. "Are you suggesting a DNA test?" Ethan nodded. "It's the only way to know for sure." Vanessa's hands trembled slightly as she set the glass down. "I'll do it," she said, her voice determined yet fragile. "I need to know if he's really my son." The next few days were a blur of arrangements, coordinating the DNA test, keeping the information away from prying eyes and navigating the awkward, tension-filled interactions between Ethan, Vanessa, and Jake. The results would take time, and in that time, the three of them were forced into an uneasy coexistence, each trying to suppress the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm them. Ethan found himself drawn to Jake despite his initial wariness. There was a vulnerability in the boy, a yearning for answers that mirrored Ethan's own. As they spent more time together, Ethan's suspicions were gradually replaced by a deepening sense of empathy. He couldn't deny the bond that was beginning to form, a bond that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. Vanessa, on the other hand, seemed to be walking on eggshells, torn between hope and fear. Her interactions with Jake were cautious, as if she were afraid that one wrong word might shatter the fragile connection they were trying to build. The atmosphere in the house was tense, filled with unspoken questions and lingering doubts. Ethan knew that the waiting was the hardest part. Each day felt like a countdown to an inevitable revelation, one that could either break them completely or bring a long-lost sense of closure. The waiting had become unbearable. Ethan found himself constantly checking his phone for any updates from the lab. The anticipation gnawed at him, making each day feel longer than the last. Vanessa, on the other hand, seemed trapped in a cycle of nervous habits, pacing the living room, biting her nails, and muttering to herself in moments she thought no one was watching. One evening, Ethan found her sitting alone in Jake's would-be room. It was a small space, barely furnished, but Vanessa had made it her sanctuary during the wait. She was holding an old photograph of her younger self, smiling with a baby boy cradled in her arms. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, unsure of what to say. Vanessa noticed him and quickly wiped away a tear. "I was thinking about the last time I saw him," she admitted. Her voice was fragile, but there was a resolve beneath the sadness. "It was a normal day, you know? I never thought he wouldn't come back." Ethan moved closer, his expression softening. "What really happened, Vanessa? I need to know everything." She nodded slowly, as if finally ready to open up. "We were at the market. I was distracted, just for a moment. I turned around and he was gone. Just like that. I searched everywhere, called his name until I lost my voice. But there was no trace of him. The police said it was probably a kidnapping. They never found any leads, no ransom demands, nothing." Ethan felt a pang of guilt for the times he had accused Vanessa of being distant without understanding the depths of her trauma. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Vanessa shook her head. "You didn't know. I didn't let you in." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of a knock at the front door cut through the heavy silence. It was Jake, who had started showing up more frequently since the DNA test was taken. Vanessa quickly wiped her eyes and stood up, trying to compose herself. "Come in, Jake," Ethan called out, and the boy stepped inside, looking more comfortable than before, but still guarded. "Any news?" Jake asked, glancing between Ethan and Vanessa. "Not yet," Ethan answered, his voice steady. "But it should be soon." Jake nodded, his expression a mix of anxiety and hope. "I've been thinking about what happens next. If it's true." Vanessa looked at him, her eyes filled with a desperate longing. "If it's true, Jake, then we'll figure it out together. I won't let you slip away again." The moment was interrupted by Ethan's phone vibrating on the table. The caller ID read lab results. Ethan's heart raced as he answered the call, his voice unsteady. "Yes, this is Ethan Miller. Yes, I'm ready for the results." Vanessa and Jake watched Ethan closely, their breaths held as if the outcome were a matter of life and death. Ethan's face was impossible to read as he listened to the person on the other end of the line. Then he slowly lowered the phone, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "It's a match," Ethan finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's your son, Vanessa." Vanessa let out a choked sob, tears streaming down her face as she rushed toward Jake, pulling him into a tight embrace. For the first time in what felt like forever, she held her son in her arms again. Jake stood still at first, unsure of how to respond, but slowly, he wrapped his arms around her, his face buried in her shoulder. Ethan watched the reunion, a wave of unexpected emotions crashing over him. There was relief, certainly, but also a sense of profound sadness for all the years lost and the memories that would never be recovered. But the reality of the situation soon set in. The confirmation of Jake's identity raised more questions than it answered. Ethan was determined to uncover how Jake had survived all these years and why he had reappeared now, after so much time. That night, as the three of them sat together at the dinner table, Ethan tried to break the awkward silence. "Jake, where have you been all these years? Do you remember anything at all about what happened after the market?" Jake's gaze was distant, as if he were searching through a foggy maze of memories. "I was taken to a place far from here, I think. I was kept in a house for a while. I don't remember much about it, just that it was always dark and the windows were boarded up. There were other kids, too." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "Other kids? Did you ever find out who was behind it?" Jake shook his head. "No, they never showed their faces, at least not clearly. But I heard them talk sometimes. They mentioned a man called the Handler. He was the one in charge." Vanessa covered her mouth in horror. "My God, Jake." Jake continued, his voice low. "One day, there was a commotion. Police sirens, people shouting. I managed to escape through a back door. I've been on the streets ever since, trying to survive and trying to find you." Ethan's mind raced, connecting dots that had never been connected before. He was aware of criminal networks involved in human trafficking, but he never imagined it would hit this close to home. Vanessa's voice broke the silence. "Why didn't you come to me sooner, Jake?" Jake's eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "I didn't know if I could trust you. For a long time, I thought maybe you gave me up." The words hit Vanessa like a punch to the gut. "I would never." "I know that now," Jake interrupted, his voice softer. "But back then, it was the only thing that made sense. I thought no one wanted me." Vanessa reached out, taking Jake's hand. "I wanted you every day, Jake. I never stopped searching." Ethan felt a surge of determination. "We need to find out who did this. We need to get justice for Jake, for all the years stolen from him." Jake nodded, a fire in his eyes that Ethan hadn't seen before. "I want that too. I want to find the Handler, and I want to make sure he never does this to anyone else." It was clear that this was only the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter filled with both hope and danger. Ethan knew that the road ahead would be treacherous, but he also knew that for the first time in a long time, they had a chance to heal, to fight back, and to reclaim the life that had been taken from them. The weight of the revelation still hung heavy in the air as Ethan, Vanessa, and Jake grappled with the truth. But there was no time to waste. If Jake's story about the Handler was accurate, they needed to act quickly. This wasn't just about finding answers. It was about ensuring safety for Jake and perhaps others still trapped in the clutches of the same shadowy figure. The next morning, Ethan was already on his laptop by dawn, searching for any records related to missing children or ongoing investigations that might align with Jake's account. He had access to certain confidential databases through his pharmaceutical connections, resources that most people didn't have. It was risky to use them for personal matters, but this was different. He wasn't just investigating a crime. He was fighting to protect his family. Vanessa came downstairs, her face pale from another sleepless night. She paused at the sight of Ethan hunched over the screen, his eyes bloodshot from hours of research. "Did you find anything?" Ethan shook his head, frustrated. "Not yet, but I'm reaching out to some contacts in law enforcement. If anyone knows about this Handler and his operations, it'll be them." Vanessa's voice was tinged with desperation. "Ethan, what if they try to take Jake back? What if it's not safe here?" Ethan stopped typing and turned to her, his gaze firm. "We'll protect him, Vanessa. No one is going to take him away again. I promise." Meanwhile, Jake sat silently in the corner, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. He had started to open up to Ethan and Vanessa, but there was still a wariness in his eyes, a look of someone who had learned the hard way not to trust too easily. But beneath the tough exterior, Ethan could see glimpses of a scared boy, longing for the warmth of a home he'd never truly known. "Jake," Ethan called softly, catching the boy's attention. "Do you remember anything else? Any details, no matter how small, that could help us?" Jake's brow furrowed in concentration. There was one man who seemed different from the others. He wasn't like the guards or caretakers. He was dressed better, more professional, like he was in charge. Ethan's curiosity piqued. Did he have a name? Jake shook his head. No, but he always had a silver briefcase with him. And once, when he thought no one was listening, I heard him talking about a place called Black Creek. Ethan immediately started typing the name into various search engines, hoping to find a lead. But there were too many results. Black Creek was a common name, attached to parks, small towns, and even a few businesses. It was a needle in a haystack. But then, a thought struck him. He turned to Vanessa. Do you remember anything about a Black Creek from when Jake was taken? Anything that stood out in the investigation? Vanessa's eyes widened. Yes, there was a rumor, a possible location the police looked into briefly. It was an abandoned warehouse complex near a place called Black Creek on the outskirts of town. But they never found anything concrete, and the lead went cold. Ethan's heart raced. It's a long shot, but it's the best lead we have. Without hesitation, he reached for his phone and dialed one of his oldest friends, Detective Sam Phillips. Sam had been Ethan's college roommate, and their friendship had endured through the ups and downs of life. If there was anyone Ethan could trust to dig deeper without raising suspicion, it was Sam. Ethan, it's been a while, Sam answered, his voice both surprised and pleased. Yeah, Sam, it has, Ethan replied, trying to keep his tone casual. But I need a favor. It's urgent. Sam's voice became serious. What's going on? Are you in trouble? Not me, Ethan clarified. It's about Vanessa and Jake. I'll explain everything, but right now, I need you to check out a lead on a place called Black Creek. It might be connected to something big. Sam didn't ask any more questions, sensing the urgency in Ethan's voice. I'll see what I can find. Give me a few hours. As they waited for Sam's call, Vanessa and Jake grew more anxious. The weight of the unknown pressed down on them like a dark cloud, but there was also a sliver of hope. Hope that they might finally be able to confront the past and, maybe, reclaim some semblance of normalcy. A few hours later, Ethan's phone buzzed, breaking the tense silence. It was Sam. Ethan, I found something, Sam said, his voice cautious but determined. There's a report about a series of abandoned buildings near a creek, just outside city limits. No official operations there, but it's been linked to suspicious activities for years. No one's been able to pin anything solid on it, though. Ethan's pulse quickened. Do you think it's worth checking out? It's definitely worth a look, Sam replied. But be careful, Ethan. If this place is connected to trafficking or other criminal activities, it could be dangerous. Ethan nodded, more to himself than to Sam. Thanks, Sam. I owe you one. You owe me a drink when this is over, Sam joked, trying to lighten the mood. But seriously, Ethan, don't do anything stupid. Ethan hung up and turned to Vanessa and Jake. We have a location. It's risky, but I think we need to go there ourselves. We can't wait for the authorities. We need answers now. Vanessa looked terrified at the prospect, but she nodded. If there's a chance we can find out more about what happened to Jake, we have to try. Jake's face was determined, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. I want to go too. I need to see it. Ethan hesitated for a moment. Are you sure, Jake? It could be dangerous. Jake's jaw tightened. I'm sure. I've been running for too long. It's time to face it. That night, they drove toward the outskirts of town, navigating through winding roads that grew narrower and darker as they approached the location Sam had described. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under the tires. When they finally arrived, the place looked even more sinister than Ethan had imagined. It was a series of crumbling warehouses, surrounded by a dense forest that seemed to swallow all light and sound. Ethan parked the car a safe distance away, and they all got out, their breaths visible in the cold night air. We'll move slowly, stay close, Ethan instructed, his voice low and steady. If anything goes wrong, we get out of here. No heroics. They crept toward the largest building, the one Jake had described. It was dark and silent, but there was an undeniable sense of menace in the air. They reached a side door, and Ethan found it unlocked. He glanced at Vanessa and Jake, who both nodded. With a deep breath, Ethan pushed the door open, and they stepped into the darkness. The smell of damp and decay filled the air, mingling with the faintest hint of something metallic, blood, perhaps, or the ghosts of past violence. They moved through the maze of corridors, their footsteps echoing eerily. Suddenly, they heard a noise, a faint rustling, followed by a low voice speaking rapidly in a language Ethan didn't recognize. "Stay behind me," Ethan whispered to Vanessa and Jake. They followed the sound cautiously, each step heightening the tension. And then they saw it, a dim light flickering in the distance, revealing the shadowy outline of a figure moving swiftly. It was time for answers. The dim light flickered like a failing heartbeat in the darkness of the warehouse, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. Ethan's instincts screamed caution, but the urgency to get closer was stronger. He signaled for Vanessa and Jake to stay back, then took a slow, deliberate step forward. Vanessa's eyes were wide, fear etched into her face. "Ethan, be careful," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake, on the other hand, was tense but steady. His eyes were fixed on the light, as if it held the answers he'd sought for so long. Ethan glanced back at them both, nodding reassuringly before continuing toward the source of the glow. As they moved deeper into the building, the air grew colder, and the musty scent of neglect became almost unbearable. Ethan noticed signs of recent activity: discarded cigarette butts, empty food wrappers, and a few worn blankets spread out in a corner. Someone had been here, maybe recently. The sound of muffled voices suddenly grew clearer. Ethan pressed his back against a wall and peered around the corner. In a small, dimly lit room, he saw two men standing next to a table cluttered with papers, old phones, and a few handguns. One of the men was tall and lean, his face partially hidden by a hood, while the other seemed nervous, constantly shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Ethan tried to catch snippets of their conversation. Shipment was delayed. The hooded man muttered in a low, gravelly voice. "The boss won't be happy." The nervous man nodded quickly. "I know, but we can't move it until the roadblocks are cleared. We need to lay low for now." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. These men were clearly connected to something larger, perhaps even to the handler himself. But they couldn't just storm in. One wrong move, and things could turn deadly in an instant. Ethan leaned back toward Vanessa and Jake, whispering urgently. "There are two of them. They seem to be discussing some kind of operation, maybe connected to the trafficking. But we need to find a safer way to get more information without drawing attention." Jake's face was taut, his eyes burning with determination. "I know that voice," he said suddenly, his voice barely a whisper. "The taller one. I think he was one of the guards back then." Ethan's mind raced. This was the closest they had come to uncovering the truth, but it was also the most dangerous position they'd found themselves in. They couldn't afford to act recklessly. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps approached from the opposite side of the corridor. Ethan's instincts kicked in, and he quickly pulled Vanessa and Jake into a small alcove, pressing them against the wall. A third man, heavily built and armed, walked past them, his flashlight sweeping the area. He seemed to be doing a routine patrol of the premises. They held their breath as the man paused for a moment, the beam of his flashlight dangerously close to their hiding spot. Vanessa's hand clutched Ethan's arm tightly, her nails digging into his skin. The silence was suffocating, the tension unbearable. But after what felt like an eternity, the man moved on, his footsteps fading into the distance. Ethan exhaled slowly, whispering, "We can't stay here. We need to find another way in." They carefully retraced their steps, moving further into the maze of darkened hallways. As they searched for a more discreet entrance, they stumbled upon a small room with several rusted filing cabinets and an old desk. Hoping to find something useful, Ethan began rifling through the papers, trying to keep the noise to a minimum. Vanessa found a stack of old documents marked with a name that sent chills down her spine. The handler. "Ethan, look at this," she whispered urgently, handing him the papers. The documents were a mix of financial ledgers, coded messages, and scribbled notes about various operations, including the trafficking of children. The words blurred in Ethan's vision as he scanned through them, feeling a sickening realization wash over him. "Black Creek isn't just a location," he muttered. "It's a central hub. These bastards have been running this operation right under our noses. Jake's voice was filled with a mix of rage and anguish. I knew it. I knew they were hiding something here. Before they could absorb the full extent of the discovery, they heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked behind them. Ethan froze, feeling a cold dread seep into his veins. Turn around. Slowly, a harsh voice ordered. Ethan obeyed, turning to face a man with a cold, calculating expression, a gun pointed directly at him. Vanessa and Jake followed suit, their faces pale. Who the hell are you? And what are you doing here? The man demanded, his voice dripping with menace. Ethan's mind raced, trying to think of a plausible story. We're just lost, he said, keeping his voice calm. We didn't mean to intrude, but the man wasn't buying it. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked Jake up and down. You. I know you. You're the kid who escaped. Jake's face tightened, but he stood his ground. Yeah, I am. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. The man laughed coldly. Brave words, kid. But you shouldn't have come back. The handler doesn't like loose ends. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He knew they were running out of options. But before he could think of a plan, Vanessa took a bold step forward. Let him go, she said, her voice strong despite the fear in her eyes. You can take me instead. Just leave him alone. The man seemed momentarily surprised by Vanessa's courage, but his expression quickly hardened. That's not how this works, lady. No one leaves until I say so. Ethan felt a surge of desperation. He couldn't let this man take them. Listen, he said, his voice low and urgent. We have evidence now. We know about the operation. The money trails everything. If we disappear, the authorities will come down on this place like a hammer. The man hesitated, his grip on the gun wavering slightly. You're bluffing. Am I? Ethan shot back, trying to sound convincing. Or maybe you're the one who's scared of what the handler will do to you if this all gets exposed. The man's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but just as it seemed he might lower the gun, a sudden noise shattered the standoff. The door burst open, and several men with guns stormed in, their faces grim. Ethan's heart sank. This wasn't a rescue. It was reinforcement. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But then, amidst the chaos, a familiar voice rang out. Ethan, Vanessa, get down. It was Sam, followed by a team of law enforcement officers who had arrived just in time. Shots rang out as the officers engaged the criminals, the room erupting into chaos. Ethan grabbed Vanessa and Jake, pulling them to the ground as bullets whizzed overhead. The fight was brutal and fast. Ethan could barely make out the figures moving in the dark, but he could hear Sam's voice barking orders, the sounds of scuffles, and then the unmistakable clatter of guns hitting the ground. After what felt like an eternity, the gunfire ceased, replaced by the heavy breathing of exhausted men. Sam approached Ethan, his face lined with relief. You okay? Sam asked, helping Ethan to his feet. Ethan nodded, still in shock. I can't believe you came. Sam smirked. What are friends for? Jake was still trembling, but he looked up at Ethan and Vanessa with a mixture of gratitude and newfound hope. We did it, he said, his voice cracking. We really did it. But Ethan knew this was just the beginning. The handler was still out there, and so were many unanswered questions. Yet, as he held Vanessa and Jake close, he also knew that for the first time in a long while, they were truly fighting together. The morning of the operation was cold and overcast, as if the weather itself shared in the tension that filled the air. Ethan and Vanessa drove Jake to the designated location in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The plan was clear but dangerous, and the weight of it seemed to hang like a heavy fog around them. Jake sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his face a mix of determination and underlying fear. He was about to confront the man who had stolen his childhood, the shadow that had haunted him for years. As they approached the drop-off point, Vanessa reached back and took Jake's hand, squeezing it gently. I love you, she said, her voice barely audible. I love you too, Mom, Jake replied, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. Ethan parked the car a few blocks away from the location to avoid raising suspicion. He turned to face Jake, his expression firm but filled with concern. Remember, you're not alone out there, he said. We'll be watching, and we'll come for you if things go south. Just stick to the plan. Jake nodded. I know. I'll be okay. Ethan couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Stay smart, Jake, he added, his voice catching slightly. You're braver than I ever was. With a final nod, Jake stepped out of the car and walked toward the alley where he was supposed to make contact. Ethan and Vanessa watched as his figure grew smaller, eventually disappearing into the shadows. Vanessa's hand trembled as she reached for Ethan's. I hate this, she whispered. I hate that we have to do this. Ethan squeezed her hand reassuringly. I know, but it's the only way to stop him. From their surveillance van a few blocks away, Sam's voice crackled over the radio. Jake's in position. He's doing great so far. Ethan adjusted his headset. Keep your eyes on him, Sam. Don't lose sight for a second. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, the anxiety mounting with each tick of the clock. Ethan's eyes were locked on the live feed from the hidden cameras they had set up, his breath shallow and tense. Then, finally, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. A dark SUV pulled up slowly at the end of the alley, its tinted windows obscuring the occupants. The back door opened, and a tall figure stepped out. Even from a distance, Ethan recognized him. It was the handler, the man responsible for Jake's years of torment. The handler approached Jake with a measured stride, his eyes cold and calculating. So, you came back, he said, his voice low and chilling. Jake stood his ground, his hands in his pockets to hide their trembling. I want answers, he said, his voice stronger than he expected. Why did you take me? What did you do with all the other kids? The handler's lips curled into a sinister smile. You were valuable to us, Jake. You and the others. You were part of a bigger plan, one that made a lot of people very rich. Jake's anger flared, but he kept his composure. What plan? Who else is involved? The handler's eyes narrowed. You really think you're getting out of this alive, don't you? At that moment, Ethan's voice crackled over the radio. Sam, we've got enough. Move in now. But just as Sam was about to signal his team, the handler made a sudden move, grabbing Jake by the arm and pulling him close. You're not leaving this time, he hissed. Jake struggled, panic rising as the handler pulled a gun from his coat. Ethan's heart stopped. He bolted out of the van, running toward the alley with a speed fueled by desperation. Jake, get down! Ethan shouted as he sprinted toward them. In the chaos that followed, Sam's team moved in, guns drawn and shouting commands. The handler fired a shot toward the advancing officers, dragging Jake toward the SUV. Ethan reached for his own gun, but he couldn't get a clear shot without risking Jake's safety. Jake fought back with everything he had, kicking and twisting in the handler's grip. The man's hold loosened for a brief moment, and Jake took his chance, elbowing him in the ribs and breaking free. But the handler was quick, recovering his balance and aiming the gun directly at Jake's back. Time seemed to slow as Ethan raised his weapon, adrenaline surging through his veins. He aimed carefully, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. Drop it! Ethan shouted, his voice echoing through the alley. The handler hesitated, his eyes flickering between Jake and Ethan. For a moment, it looked like he might surrender. But then, with a defiant sneer, he turned the gun back toward Jake. Without a second thought, Ethan squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, loud and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. The handler staggered back, his hand clutching his shoulder, the gun slipping from his grasp. He fell to the ground, writhing in pain as officers swarmed him, securing him with handcuffs. Jake stood frozen, his breath coming in ragged gasps as Ethan reached him. Are you okay? Ethan asked, his voice breaking with relief. Jake nodded, tears filling his eyes. I'm okay, Dad. I'm okay. Ethan pulled him into a tight embrace, the fear and relief overwhelming him all at once. I'm so proud of you, he whispered. You were so brave. As the officers secured the scene, Vanessa rushed toward them, her face wet with tears. She threw her arms around Jake, holding him as if she never wanted to let go. I was so scared, she sobbed. But you did it, Jake. You really did it. Jake hugged her back, his body finally relaxing in her arms. We did it together. he said softly. Sam approached, his expression both serious and relieved. We got him, Ethan. We got the handler. It's over. Ethan looked at Sam, his eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Sam. We couldn't have done this without you. Sam smiled. You'd do the same for me. As they walked back to the car, the weight of everything that had happened began to sink in. There was still much to process, wounds to heal, and therapy ahead. But for the first time in years, there was a sense of closure. Jake's childhood had been stolen, but now, he finally had a chance at a future. And Ethan and Vanessa, too, had found something they thought they had lost long ago. A family reunited by a bond that no darkness could break. The following days felt like a surreal blur, a strange mix of relief, exhaustion, and a lingering sense of disbelief. The handler was behind bars, and Jake was finally safe. But the scars left by years of separation, trauma, and uncertainty weren't going to heal overnight. Ethan and Vanessa took time off work, determined to focus on rebuilding their family. They kept a low profile, wary of any potential fallout from the arrest of the handler. The police had assured them that Jake's name and identity would be kept confidential throughout the legal proceedings, but the fear of retaliation lingered in the back of their minds. Jake had settled into the guest room, now transformed into his own space. Vanessa had wasted no time decorating it with a mix of things she hoped he would like: books, posters, and even a few items from his childhood that she had kept all these years. It was a bittersweet attempt to bridge the gap between what was lost and what was being rebuilt. One morning, as the sun streamed through the kitchen window, Ethan found Jake sitting at the table, staring at a half-eaten bowl of cereal. His face was expressionless, but his eyes betrayed the heaviness of thoughts that were too big for his age. "You okay?" Ethan asked, sitting down across from him. Jake hesitated, then shrugged. "I guess. It's just weird. Being here, like this. I never thought it would actually happen." Ethan nodded, understanding. "It's going to take time. For all of us. But we'll figure it out one step at a time." Jake looked up, his eyes searching Ethan's. "Do you really think we can? Be a real family, I mean?" Ethan's heart ached at the vulnerability in Jake's question. "I think we already are," he said softly. "It might be messy, and it won't be perfect. But I promise you, we'll try. We'll try every day." Later that day, Vanessa suggested that they go out. Something normal, something that didn't involve police reports or therapy sessions. She proposed a simple outing to the local ice cream shop, a place she used to visit with Jake when he was a baby. It was a small but meaningful attempt to create new memories. As they arrived at the brightly colored shop, Jake seemed hesitant, unsure of how to act in such an ordinary setting. Ethan and Vanessa kept it light, joking about which flavors were the best and trying to make Jake smile. It worked, if only briefly. Jake eventually picked mint chocolate chip, and they sat at a small table by the window, eating their ice cream in a comfortable silence. Suddenly, Jake broke the quiet. "Do you remember the time you took me here, Mom? When I spilled the ice cream all over myself?" Vanessa's eyes widened, her face a mix of surprise and joy. "You remember that?" Jake nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, you didn't get mad. You just laughed and said, 'Guess we'll have to get you a new shirt.'" Tears welled up in Vanessa's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, smiling brightly. "I never thought you'd remember that." "I remember more than I thought I did," Jake admitted. "It's like little pieces are coming back now." Ethan reached over and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "We'll help you find all the pieces," he said gently. That night, back at the house, Ethan found Vanessa in Jake's room, sitting on the edge of the bed while he was brushing his teeth in the bathroom. She was holding an old stuffed bear that she had kept for years, hoping that someday she might be able to give it back to him. "When I found this in the attic, I wasn't sure if I should show it to him," Vanessa said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't know if it's something he wants to remember." Ethan sat beside her, looking at the worn toy. "Let him decide," he suggested. "He's strong enough to handle it, Vanessa." "He's already proven that." Jake emerged from the bathroom, wiping his face with a towel. He noticed the bear in Vanessa's hands and paused. "Is that mine?" he asked quietly. Vanessa nodded, her eyes searching his face for any sign of discomfort. "Yes, It was your favorite when you were little. Jake walked over and took the bear, examining it closely. There was a long moment of silence as he ran his fingers over the faded fabric and the frayed stitching. Then, to Vanessa's surprise, Jake hugged the bear tightly, as if reclaiming a lost part of himself. "I missed him," Jake said simply, his voice breaking. Vanessa's heart swelled with emotion, and she reached out, pulling Jake into a warm embrace. "We missed you, Jake," she whispered. "Every single day." As the weeks passed, the family began to establish a new rhythm. Jake started attending a small, private school, where the staff was aware of his past but treated him like any other student. The transition was challenging. Jake struggled with trust and fitting in, but he was trying, and that was enough for Ethan and Vanessa. Therapy sessions became a regular part of their routine, with Ethan and Vanessa attending both individually and as a family. The sessions were often painful, as Jake shared details of his years on the streets and the horrors of his captivity. But they were also healing, each story another step toward rebuilding their broken family bond. One evening, after a particularly intense therapy session, Jake approached Ethan in the living room. "Can I ask you something?" he said hesitantly. "Of course," Ethan replied. "Why did you stay?" "With Mom. I mean, after everything." Ethan considered the question carefully, his eyes softening. "Because I love her, Jake. And I love you. Sometimes, love means staying even when things are hard. Especially when things are hard." Jake seemed to ponder this for a moment. "I think I get it. I mean, I'm still figuring it out, but I think I understand why you didn't give up." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. "We didn't give up because of you, Jake. You were always worth fighting for." As the days turned into months, the wounds began to slowly heal. Jake still had nightmares, and Vanessa still felt the weight of guilt for the years lost. Ethan, too, struggled with his own sense of failure, wishing he could have done more, sooner. But they were together, learning to forgive themselves and each other, one day at a time. On a quiet Sunday morning, the family gathered around the kitchen table for breakfast. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the room. Vanessa was flipping pancakes, laughing as Ethan tried to sneak a taste before they were ready. Jake watched them, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Can I help?" he asked, surprising them both. Vanessa beamed. "Of course, sweetie. You can be in charge of the syrup." Jake moved to the counter, grabbing the syrup bottle with a confidence that had been missing for so long. It was a small moment, but for Ethan and Vanessa, it felt monumental. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, the three of them felt a real sense of hope, a chance to build a future together, free from the shadows of the past. The crisp autumn air brought a sense of renewal to Ethan, Vanessa, and Jake. The leaves had started to change, their vibrant colors hinting at transformation. The family's life had settled into a rhythm that, while not entirely free of challenges, felt steady for the first time in years. Jake was adapting to school, albeit with some bumps along the way. He still struggled with trust, unsure of how to interact with other kids his age, but there were small victories. He'd started talking to a few classmates and had even been invited to join a study group. It wasn't easy, but he was trying, step by step. One Saturday morning, Vanessa proposed an idea that had been on her mind for weeks. As they sat around the breakfast table, she cleared her throat, trying to sound casual. "I was thinking, maybe we could take a trip, just the three of us. Somewhere quiet, away from all this." Ethan looked up from his newspaper, intrigued. "Where did you have in mind?" Vanessa smiled, her eyes filled with a hope she hadn't shown in a while. "I was thinking of the lake house. We haven't been there in years. It's secluded, peaceful. It might be good for all of us." Jake seemed hesitant at first. "The lake house? You mean the one you used to take me to when I was little?" "Yes," Vanessa said gently. "I know it holds a lot of old memories, but I think it could be a place for us to make new ones." Jake looked unsure, but there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "I don't remember much about it, but I'm willing to try." Ethan and Vanessa exchanged a look of relief. "Then it's settled," Ethan said, a smile breaking across his face. "We'll leave tomorrow morning. The drive to the lake house was filled with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Ethan navigated the winding roads with ease, and Vanessa hummed along to old songs playing on the radio. Jake stared out the window, watching the scenery shift from suburban streets to lush forests and, finally, to the glimmering waters of the lake. When they pulled up to the small, rustic cabin, Jake stepped out slowly, taking in the sight of the place that had been both a haven and a distant memory. The lake sparkled under the midday sun, and the gentle sound of waves lapping against the shore filled the air. It was both familiar and foreign. Vanessa unlocked the door, revealing a cozy living room filled with the scent of cedar and nostalgia. Dusty photo frames lined the mantelpiece, capturing moments from the past. Ethan and Vanessa's early years together, and a much younger Jake, smiling widely as he splashed in the lake. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Vanessa asked softly as Jake wandered around the cabin, his fingers tracing the edges of old furniture. Jake nodded. "Yeah, but it's nice too. I think I like it." That afternoon, Ethan suggested they take the small rowboat out on the lake, something he and Jake had done often when Jake was little. Jake seemed hesitant but agreed. They gathered life jackets, fishing rods, and a small cooler filled with snacks, then made their way down to the wooden dock. As Ethan rowed them toward the center of the lake, Vanessa leaned back, enjoying the warmth of the sun on her face. "This was always your favorite part, Jake," she said, glancing at him. Jake's expression softened. "I remember you telling me stories out here, Mom, about pirates and treasure islands." Vanessa chuckled. "You always wanted to be the captain." Jake smiled, a genuine one that reached his eyes. "Maybe I still do." Ethan watched the interaction with a mix of pride and tenderness. "We could use a captain around here," he joked, "especially one who knows how to steer us toward the best fishing spots." Jake's laughter rang out, a sound that felt new and familiar all at once. For a moment, everything felt right. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they anchored the boat and cast their lines into the still water. They sat in comfortable silence, each absorbed in the beauty of the moment. It was Vanessa who broke the quiet, her voice thoughtful. "Jake, I want you to know, we're so proud of you," she said, "not just for surviving, but for finding the strength to come back to us." Jake looked at her, emotion shining in his eyes. "I'm trying, Mom. I really am." Ethan placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "And that's all that matters. We're not expecting perfection, Jake. Just honesty and the chance to build something real." Jake nodded, his eyes glassy. "I'm glad I came back. I never thought I'd get this. A real family." Vanessa wiped a tear from her cheek, her heart full. "Neither did we. But we're here now, and that's what counts." The next morning, Vanessa found Jake sitting on the edge of the dock, his feet dangling above the water. She joined him, sitting close but not intruding on his space. "I had a dream last night," Jake said quietly. "I was back in that dark place, the one where they kept me. But this time, you and Dad were there. You found me and you got me out." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her voice steady. "We would have moved heaven and earth to find you, Jake. We still will, if you ever need us to." Jake looked down at the water, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard, you know, trying to let go of the past." "I know," Vanessa said softly, "but you don't have to do it alone. We'll help you every step of the way." As the days at the lake house passed, they fell into a rhythm, fishing, cooking meals together, and telling stories around a crackling campfire at night. Each day felt like a small step forward, a chance to heal and rediscover what it meant to be a family. On the last night of their trip, they sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows. The sky was a canvas of stars, clear and vast, as if offering a promise of better days ahead. Ethan turned to Jake, his voice filled with quiet hope. "Jake, there's something I want you to know," he said. "No matter where you go or what you do, you'll always have a place here. This is your home. We're your home." Jake's voice was steady, but filled with emotion. "I know, Dad. And I'm not going anywhere." Vanessa reached over, wrapping her arms around both Ethan and Jake, holding them close. "We made it," she whispered. "We really made it." The fire crackled, the embers glowing softly, as the family sat together, embracing the moment. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a new beginning, one built on love, resilience, and the promise of tomorrow. The trip to the lake house had brought an unexpected sense of calm to Ethan, Vanessa, and Jake. The days there felt like stepping stones toward healing, each one laying a foundation for a stronger bond. But the return to everyday life came with its own challenges. As they pulled back into their driveway, reality settled in. The weight of the past was still present, but they were better equipped to face it together. A few weeks later, the day of the handler's trial arrived. Ethan and Vanessa debated whether Jake should attend, knowing it would be painful to relive everything. But Jake insisted on being there, determined to confront the man who had haunted his life for so long. The courtroom was packed, a mix of reporters, investigators, and a few other victims who had come seeking closure. Jake sat between Ethan and Vanessa, his posture tense but his gaze unwavering. The handler, now in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, showed no remorse as he was led to the defendant's table. When the prosecutor called Jake to testify, he stood, taking a deep breath. Ethan whispered words of encouragement. "You're strong, Jake. Just tell the truth." Jake approached the stand, his heart pounding but his mind clear. As he recounted the years of captivity, the crowded courtroom seemed to fade away, leaving only his voice echoing through the room. He spoke of the fear, the darkness, and the longing for a family he thought he'd never see again. He also spoke of the determination that had kept him alive, the hope that one day he would be found. The handler's defense attorney attempted to discredit Jake's account, but the boy's courage and honesty were undeniable. Jake never wavered, even under the harsh scrutiny of cross-examination. Vanessa's eyes brimmed with tears as she watched her son confront his nightmare head-on. When Jake's testimony ended, he returned to his seat. Vanessa wrapped her arms around him, her voice a soft whisper in his ear. "I'm so proud of you," Ethan added, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "You were incredible up there, Jake." The trial continued for several days, with other witnesses and experts testifying to the scale of the handler's criminal operations. The evidence was overwhelming, and as the verdict was read aloud, guilty on all charges, a wave of relief swept through the courtroom. For the victims and their families, it was a long-awaited moment of justice. As they left the courthouse, a group of reporters swarmed around them, eager for a statement. Ethan shielded Jake as best he could, but the boy surprised him by stopping and addressing the crowd directly. "I don't want to be known as a victim," Jake said, his voice strong and clear. "I'm not just what happened to me. I'm here now, and I'm ready to live my life." It was a powerful declaration, one that left both Ethan and Vanessa in awe of Jake's resilience. The reporters fell silent, and a few even lowered their cameras, as if recognizing the depth of the moment. That evening, back at home, the family gathered around the dinner table. It was a simple meal, spaghetti with meatballs, one of Jake's favorites. But there was an unspoken significance to it, a sense that they were marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As they sat down to eat, Vanessa raised her glass. "To Jake," she said, her voice warm with emotion. "To the bravest person I know." Ethan raised his glass as well. "To new beginnings for all of us." Jake, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and hope, lifted his glass. "To family," he said simply. The following months were filled with a sense of normalcy that had once seemed impossible. Jake continued to attend therapy, working through the trauma that lingered beneath the surface. Vanessa, too, sought help, dealing with the guilt and grief she had carried for so long. Ethan became more present, both at home and in his own personal life, finding a renewed sense of purpose not only as a father but as a husband and a man determined to do right by his family. One sunny afternoon, Ethan found Jake sitting on the back porch, looking out at the yard where the grass had started to grow green again. He joined Jake, sitting beside him in comfortable silence. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked. Jake's response was thoughtful. "About the future. About what I want to do now." Ethan nodded, his voice gentle. "You have so many possibilities, Jake. You can be anything you want." Jake smiled slightly. "I know, and I think I want to help others like me. Maybe become a counselor, or work with kids who've been through tough times." Ethan felt a surge of pride. his heart swelling at the realization of how far Jake had come. "That's a noble goal, Jake. You'd be amazing at it." Jake turned to him, his eyes sincere. "I had you and Mom to help me, even when I didn't think I wanted it. I want to be that for someone else." Ethan put an arm around Jake, pulling him close. "You already are, son." That summer, they returned to the lake house once more, this time with a different purpose. They had decided to make it a permanent getaway, a place of refuge where they could create new memories, free from the shadows of the past. On their first morning back, Jake surprised Ethan and Vanessa by making breakfast, pancakes, with a twist of chocolate chips mixed in. As they sat at the kitchen table, eating together and laughing over Jake's attempts to flip the pancakes, there was a sense of completeness that hadn't been there before. Vanessa watched Jake, her heart full. "You know, I used to dream about this," she said softly. "I used to imagine what it would be like to have you back with us, right here." Jake looked up, his expression filled with both warmth and a sense of quiet closure. "Well, here I am." Ethan reached across the table, taking Vanessa's hand in his and then reaching out to Jake. They sat like that for a moment, a circle of three, finally whole. As the day wore on, they decided to take the rowboat out again. The water was calm, the sun warm on their faces. This time, Jake took the oars, steering them confidently toward the center of the lake. "Where to, Captain?" Ethan teased. Jake smiled, the lightness in his eyes undeniable. "Anywhere we want," he said. "Anywhere we want." The family sat together, the ripples of the lake gently carrying them forward. It was a simple scene, but within it was the promise of all they had fought for. A chance to move beyond the pain, to embrace the joy of being together, and to finally find peace. It wasn't the end, but it was a beginning, their beginning, this time on their terms. And in that moment, with the sun setting behind them and the world wide open ahead, Ethan, Vanessa, and Jake knew they had truly found their way home.